view it as kind of like going to the gym, but for your eyes and really for your brain, where something like vision performance training or vision therapy or vision training, and there's differences with all these, but it's teaching the person how to use their eyes to rewire the software of their brain to change how they're using vision, but to really establish synergy between the different sensory systems and visual skills. So it's teaching the patient what it feels like, what it looks like, the depth that ensues when both eyes are pointing to the same place and the brain's turning on to that information, and then introducing it as there's movement and cognition and balance and vestibular input all engaged. And then we're building the foundational skills where with enough repetition and enough practice, these maladaptations or bad habits that we're treating no longer options because the brain's been rewired.
Hello and welcome back to the Smarter and Harder podcast, your home for 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host again today. My name is Dr. Scott Scher, and it's a pleasure to be back with all of you. So today, ladies and gentlemen, had a fantastic podcast with Dr. Bryce Appelbaum. Bryce and I met about a month ago or so before the recording of this podcast, talking about things like Methylene Blue and optimizing his neuro-optometry practice. And I got really excited about what neuro-optometry was because honestly, I didn't know a whole lot about it. And this podcast is all about neuro-optometry, which is such a cool topic. Let me give you a bit of a bio here on Bryce. So Dr. Appelbaum is a neuro-optometrist, board certified in vision therapy and rehabilitation, and is passionate about unlocking life's potential through vision. He's the founder and CEO of both successful private practice in Maryland, actually 2 offices, and an online SaaS company. He's transformed the lives of a diverse range of patients, including those struggling with vision developmental delays, recovering from concussion, which we talk about a lot, seeking eyesight improvement and optimizing visual processing, and countless other conditions, including the biohackers and optimal performers of the world as well. His clinic is called My Vision First, is in multiple locations, private practice, and he has an online program as well called ScreenFit, which is a training program designed to minimize the damage of digital devices on vision, reducing eye strain related symptoms, and promote healthy visual habits for extended screen use. So with all that said, Bryce and I had a fantastic and wide-ranging conversation. He really went over many different topics. We started off with understanding the difference between vision and sight. This is a significant difference and a very important one. We then spoke a lot about many different topics, including visual hygiene, visual ergonomics, like what's the best way to look at a screen. We spoke about blue blockers and visual performance lenses, which were interesting to me. So ways you can actually use certain types of lenses to optimize your performance while watching TV or while on a screen, really for the most part. Talked a lot about screens, a lot about how they're affecting our young people, old people. We talked about also myopia and visual disturbances as we get older, people like me, and we use me as an example. And we talked about how your vision gets worse seeing close up. So around my age, around in your 40s, and actually you can do visual exercises, easy ones, even ones that are on the toilet. We called it toilet training during this conversation to actually improve your capacity to maintain your close vision for longer. So even into your 50s, 60s, or 70s, if you're really, really intense about it and doing some exercises on a daily basis. And that's really a big part that we spoke about. We talk about exercises for the eyes, both like training your eyes, like you go to the gym and train your muscles in your arms and your legs. You can train your muscles in your eyes as well. And this is all very interesting. He has a very intensive program that he can take people through. He also has a much more of a long-term maintenance program at both his clinics and also online and at home, depending on how you see him. In lots of different ways, we kind of dove into a lot of these different types of training that he can do, including in concussion. We talked about various types of concussion, types of vision disturbances, and how he addresses these. And in the end of the podcast, we spoke about diet, nutrition, the major supplements that he uses as well in his clinical practice, especially omega-3s. Then we ended the conversation speaking about Methylene Blue as well and how he's starting to use this in his own personal life. And actually, Bryce has his own personal story of visual issues when he was a kid, and now how he's going to start using it in clinical practice. And we were debating about how many mitochondria per cell are in the eyes and those muscles, and very likely It's the most mitochondria per cell in any muscle tissue because how much our eyes are working on a regular basis. So there's so many things in this podcast that are take-home messages as a clinician to work on with our patients or to refer our patients out with, or to use in our own personal life. And in fact, in the many different aspects and examples that you'll find me doing the various little techniques and practices that he was recommending, how to look at a screen, how far it should be away from you, how to look at various ways of closing one eye and looking at a point with your vision or with a pen. We had a lot of fun during this podcast, and I learned a whole lot. And I think really just scratched the surface. So without further ado, please enjoy this podcast with Dr. Bryce Appelbaum. And if you do like our podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below and share with your friends so that others can learn as well. Enjoy. All right, Dr. Bryce Appelbaum. Good morning, good afternoon. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm psyched to be here, excited to talk, and excited to share my experience with your products as well, because I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about that at the end. Absolutely. I know you've had some experience with some methylene blue, and we've been chatting about that. But but I really wanted to have you on the podcast today because, first of all, I know very little about the eyes. I'm an internal medicine physician. I was telling you just before we started recording that I remember being in anatomy class, seeing the eye, trying to dissect the eye, but it just became this like sort of blobby mass of, and I was like, I don't know what this is. And then we went on to like the bones or something. So it was, as a medical student and then as in residency, I got very little training in the eye. And when you were telling me about your work and what you've been doing and also your personal story, which I wanted to touch on as well, because I think it's important for this podcast, I wanted to have you on because this is something that a lot of clinicians like me have no real clue about, that we don't even know it exists. We think that, our eyes just get bad and we have to wear glasses and readers, and then we get cataracts, and then we get macular degeneration, and then we have to figure out how to reverse it all. But you have more skills here, man. And so this is where I want to dig in. So to start off, maybe give us a little bit of background on kind of your story on how you got involved in optometry, and then talk a little bit about optometry training too, because this is all news to me as well. As I mentioned before we started, like, what does it take to become an optometrist? Even though I know you don't do like optometry, like, the real way, or not the real way, the standard way, let's call it. But anyway, so a little bit of your personal story and what optometry training looks like at this point.
So I identify as a functional eye doctor, which means I look at vision problems as brain problems, and our eyes are extensions of our brain. They come out in utero, and obviously they're our dominant sensory system and really important for so many aspects of life.
And they're so big, right? Like your eyes are so big when you're born, right? Because they're the same size when you die. That's right. Your eyes doesn't change.
They grow a little, but I would say percentage wise, I mean, pretty close. And for you in med school, that's probably the grossest organ or part of the body to dissect. I mean, there's goo and it's a mess. Yeah. And so I get why you're a little skeeved out from that. So optometry school is learning a ton about structure and anatomy and everything eye related, but it's really intervention of eye disease, and it's a reactive model like so much of medicine. And really what I do and what my niche specialty does is more a proactive approach, and looking at, how the inside and outside muscles of the eyes work together as a team, and how the eyes, brain, and body can make sense of that information. Mm-hmm. So for me personally, I'm really a product of the work that we do. When I was a child, I was an absolute mess. So I was lost on the soccer field. I had no idea what was going on in the classroom. And I felt like a turtle retreating to my shell in so many aspects of life, even in interpersonal communication. And the reason for that was I had these visual developmental delays. So what that meant was I had trouble focusing my eyes. My eyes didn't work well together as a team. I had poor depth perception, and I really couldn't touch the world visually because I didn't learn things the way that I was supposed to. Mm-hmm. And so fortunately, I was given the opportunity to do a ton of, at the time, what was called vision therapy and sensory integration-based occupational therapy, and really developed these functional visual skills and abilities. Mm-hmm. And the integration of all these systems so that I could thrive in the world. And I really attribute all my success in life, athletically, academically, even interpersonally, for this type of work. And what's so cool is we can accomplish now in a matter of months what was done for me in years, including for some, really intense stuff that I'm sure we'll get into. But, vision is the missing piece in so many puzzles and so many medical situations.
Yeah. I mean, this is your window, right, to the rest of the body, the rest of the system, et cetera. Like people, you have dermatologists say skin is their window, and everybody's got their own angle, but they're not, and nobody's wrong here. It's just because if you have an expertise that you can really hone in on, then everything else is a window as a result of you seeing what's going on in an organ as important as the eyes. One thing that I didn't realize, and just for those that are listening, is that optometry school is not like a year-long program at some community college, right? This is like a 4-year university postgraduate education. So, I mean, compared to ophthalmologists, I think you said that you have significant more training than they do with the eyes, right?
Well, and it's not a competition, but I will tell you, I've got good buddies who are ophthalmologists who will say, man, you had 4 years on the eyes. We had like a course and then a residency, but there's a lot involved there. And you have to know about systemic function and systemic health, which influences the eyes, to be able to really know about the eyes. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a lot, but just like any kind of graduate school, that's just the foundational work. And then from there, what you do with that information is really what matters, and learning from your patients. And in my case, residency, fellowship, everything beyond there, to really hone in on what you know and what you don't know, and then figure out how to make the most sense of all that information.
Yeah, I was just amazed that it was a 4-year-long program when I first heard about it from my sister-in-law, who's also an optometrist. But what really got me interested in the work that you do was that you're much further than what is going on in the conventional world. You're looking at vision in a much more holistic way. I think one thing that most people don't realize, and I was actually reading into this a little bit before, is how much of our brain is actually involved in vision. What is the percentage of the brain that's involved in vision? And maybe in the same conversation, you can kind of make the distinction between vision and sight as well, because I think that's an important one too.
Yeah, well, let's start with that. So we should all think of eyesight and vision as separate entities. So eyesight, the ability to see, that's a symptom. That's what glasses or contacts are for. Vision is far more complex. Vision is how our eyes move together and converge and track and focus and process information, and really how we derive meaning from the world around us and then direct the appropriate action. So eyesight is glasses, vision really is brain, and then vision problems are brain problems. And there's solutions and fixes for these brain problems with this type of work that's not really as well known as it needs to be, or even close to that yet. 2/3 of the neurons entering our brain originate from our eyes. There's more areas of our brain dedicated to processing vision than all of the other senses combined. So, the stats on the percentage of the brain dedicated to vision, anywhere from 50 to 72, it kind of depends on what you're reading, but it also depends on how you're defining vision. Like I look at visual cognition as part of vision. I look at visual memory and different perceptual skills and the ability to process visual information, all part of this intricate network of when light hits the front of the surface, that electrical signal gets transposed into the brain, and then all the pathways get tapped into. So you can't really have a head injury and not have vision be involved. And you also can't really stare at screens all day long without having vision be involved, because our visual system isn't intended for these. It's intended to guide movement and to prepare us for the saber-tooth tiger coming at us from the distance, not to be looking at these little machines all day long, blasting all this high energy, short wavelength light at us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, what you said there about visual memory and visual pieces, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think people don't realize that, like, there's distinctions here. Like, there's actually vision, like you're actually seeing, but then you're actually being able to process. Like, how do you think about that overall?
Yeah. So all babies are born without the ability to really use their eyes yet. They see in black and white. The world is really fuzzy, and they don't have the ability to track or converge or focus or even have depth perception. All of this is developed and learned through our life experiences. And so it's either learned well or not learned as well as it could be. And that's when some intervention is needed. There's so many scenarios in life that are because of these visual developmental delays where, let's say we have trouble focusing our eyes, that's going to make it so we have trouble focusing our mind. Or let's say we art secure in space? Well, it's because we haven't developed our depth perception. So there's so many scenarios where we just haven't learned how to use these systems in synergy yet. And that can impact almost everything in terms of sustain your concentration tasks, movement, sports, driving, so many areas.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then, so obviously it's all interconnected here. I think what might be interesting, kind of a way into this all would be to look into like, what are some of the top types of kids or adults that you see with, like, what are the major conditions you see? And then maybe run through a couple of them, how you kind of think about it and what kind of processes you go through to kind of assess and diagnose and treat, kind of thing. So, pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Transcriptions, makers of precision-dosed, physician-formulated, and pharmaceutical-grade formulas in the form of a buccal choky. For this episode, check out our Just Blue. It's our low-strength, pure methylene blue, 16 milligrams to optimize energy, detoxification, resilience, and performance. Go over to transcriptions.com and save 10% on your order by using code POD10 at checkout. Now back to the show.
Yeah. So there's let's hit maybe 5 main populations. So number 1, kids with visual developmental delays impacting reading, learning, and academics.
Okay.
You brought up visual memory. Our ability to think in mental pictorial images is something that's learned. And so a child who is spelling based off of how something sounds phonetically rather than how it looks visually very likely hasn't developed that ability to think in mental pictorial images. And so that can be taught and trained, but very often we're looking at that as just a child who's not smart or who needs a ton of exposure to sight words to develop that visual memory. So that's kind of the first population. Second, more than half my practice is dedicated to concussion and traumatic brain injury recovery. And, often it's the mild head injury that has major implications in life in terms of returning to learn, returning to work, returning to play, just returning to normal activities of daily living. And I'm a big believer, almost every head injury with the right work, right motivation, and right compliance cannot have vision be something that's holding it back with the right type of training. We see a lot of eye turns or lazy eyes.
Okay.
Let's talk about both of those briefly. So an eye turn, the medical term for that is strabismus. And very often strabismus from a medical model would say that, well, one of the muscles is too short or too long, and so we have to do eye muscle surgery to fix that. But in about 92% of cases, strabismus has nothing to do with eye muscle strength or length. It has to do with faulty coordination of not having learned how to use the eyes together as a cohesive team. So it's a brain problem showing up through the eyes. Yet if we're doing eye muscle surgery, we're just changing the mechanics. We're not adjusting or facilitating the neurological learning that needs to take place. And then lazy eye, the medical term for that, amblyopia, one eye not seeing as well as the other. This is one of the biggest disconnects in the medical world today. I was taught in school that after age 8, the critical period for vision development ends. You blow out the candles and poof, what you see is what you get. The brain can't be retaught. That is faulty interpretation of the research, which is really talking about vision lost, not vision gained. So Scott, if either one of us were to wear an eye patch for 6 months, take off the eye patch, we'd be sensitive to light, but we'd still be able to see. Right. You take a 6-year-old, you put an eye patch on for 6 months, you take it off, and then they literally will have lost sight because it's still developing at that point. Right. But we have patients in their 80s, 90s developing depth perception and eliminating amblyopia or learning how to see every day, but it's not as malleable. The brain's not as plastic as it is when you're younger, but you still can get there. And so that old school methodology of patching where you've got a good eye, bad eye, cover up the good eye so the bad eye has to work. There's even research that says it doesn't work. And when it does make improvement, you stop doing it and then it goes back to where it was. Got it. So the new advanced treatment is actually visual performance training, teaching the brain how to pick that eye in the presence of the open eye rather than like this, because you're already taking a fragile eye coordination system and not letting it work if you are using an eye patch. We see a lot of people for sports vision training as well as the fourth bucket there. We're all told at an early age, keep your eye on the ball, but none of us are taught how. We can teach how. I work with a bunch of different professional sports teams, individual athletes. small improvements in many areas can have a massive impact in terms of performance.
Of course. Yeah.
Whether it's visual reaction time or dynamic depth perception or contrast sensitivity, there are reasons why certain athletes separate in terms of performance, but then also potential, and we can also identify those. So one of the most fun things I do is I work with teams to help them decide who to draft or take as a free agent based off of vision development, visual cognitive development. When there's a big gap, say, take this person, send them to us, we'll close the gap, and you can get that much more return on the investment. And then the fifth area, which has become honestly one of the most fun areas for me, is biohacking our vision. And it's really any brain, and any brain that's connected to eyes, which is most brains, can be enhanced and optimized in terms of vision. So the whole, you blow out the candles in your 40s and 50s and all of a sudden your arms aren't long enough, you need reading glasses. Well, that is common, but that's not normal. And so the difference between average and normal is pretty big in many areas of health, because we're all told and we're all taught in school, the focusing system becomes more rigid and less flexible in terms of the muscles. And then you start doing this. And what we're not told is that just like exercise, if you stop using a sensory system, if you stop using a muscle, you lose voluntary control. So at a minimum, with the right type of exercises, the right type of work, you can prolong the need for your reading glasses to increase. If you're proactive enough and do it early enough, you can push that need way down the road. And I've got patients in their 70s and 80s not wearing reading glasses, but they're doing work every day. And so the
daily
people
exercise,
daily exercise. And the people that say something like eye exercises don't work, those are the same people saying that normal exercise doesn't work. Well, you got to do it, and you got to know what to do, and it works, but there's a big gap there.
So you're saying that I'm not going to have to wear glasses, or the bifocals at least at this point, right? If you can do exercises, you can at least prolong the amount of time that it would take for you to require those.
In pretty much every case.
And what you're talking about is, I have a lot of questions about all these different types of people that you see, but we'll start there because this is more personal to me, because I'm getting to the point now at 44 where I'm like, oh, well, I can still see things close, but there's something, this is not always going to be happening. As I can imagine also, when you start wearing glasses as well, like I remember when I was a kid, I went to contacts almost immediately because I was in sports and I didn't want to wear glasses, and my eyes got so shitty so fast. So it's probably the same kind of thing where your brain just starts getting lazy if you start just magnifying right away instead of doing some exercises, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. So, especially if there's functional problems, but take any pair of glasses as just kind of adjusting the new normal.
Yeah.
And if that becomes your new normal and you adapt to that, then you need something stronger or different to maintain that same clarity, and you go down this vicious cycle. So myopia, for instance, far away being blurry, nearsightedness, so up close being easier, far away being blurry, is increasing at an alarming rate right now. And 43% of America is nearsighted today. When we landed on the moon in 1969, about a fourth of America was. And it's predicted by 2050 that 50% of the world will be nearsighted, not just America. Yeah. And so much of that is from this near visual stress, prolonged screen time, and too much near work in the dark, and not enough time getting outdoors, but we can talk about that later.
Sure.
But if we look at near as the problem, and whether it's the focusing system, the inside muscles of the eyes responsible for clarity, the eye coordination system, the outside muscles responsible for making something single, depending on what the profile is, if that's the problem, very often the symptom is decreased flexibility. So far away gets blurry, especially like for you, if you're doing work all day and you've been on a screen all day, I would imagine up close is a little harder in the evening than it is at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That's
a really good question. I haven't made that distinction as to whether as the day goes on, you're saying like the longer you've been looking at a screen, the harder it will be to look at something close if you have glasses to see far, like I do, that kind of thing, as opposed to like in the morning when you wake up, it will be easier because your eye muscles aren't as fatigued, I guess, or is it? Yeah.
Yes. And it also depends on the person and the situation, but if we think about the focusing system as this sphincter muscle, this is the accommodative system.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're to squeeze your hands for 10 seconds, your hands start to hurt. But if you were to let go and come back, you could do that all day long.
Yeah.
When we're on a screen, what we're doing right now, our pupils are locked in. They're under tension over time. And unless you're lifting weights and trying to get really buff, tension over time for the visual system, that's not a good thing. And that's what contributes to eye strain and fatigue and all those symptoms.
So we don't want to take steroids for our eyes. We want to take steroids for our muscles, but not for us.
Well, that nootropics and other types of steroids are
maybe, but that's what
but not these types. Yeah, don't inject your eyeball.
Yes. Steroids in quotes. We'll call them quotes, right?
Right.
Nootropics, eye optimization. Well, which I want to talk about later too. But when you're talking about screens, this is kind of an interesting piece, right? Like I can imagine the earlier that people start screens, the more risk that they're going to have the nearsightedness. I mean, that's pretty well known, right?
Well known. We know the 3 biggest risk factors. Not enough time outdoors. It's proven that 90 to 120 minutes a day is protective in terms of onset and progression of nearsightedness.
Doesn't matter what time of day that sunlight is, or like, is it better to get in the morning or like sunset? Like, or does it have to be in like full? I don't know if we have this information.
Yeah. Well, so the study that said that, all the studies that say that it has to do with the UV exposure and engaging with 3-dimensional space.
Okay.
But timing for circadian rhythms and for just hormonal regulation and mood, I mean, that matters big time. So I always say, like, first thing in the morning, get outside, get some natural, fresh sunlight into your eyes, and then in the evening as well. But kids these days, they're not playing outside anymore.
Sure.
Right. And so like even just getting outside for a short amount of time is better than nothing. You don't have to necessarily be out there for hours, but the kids are buried in their basements on their tablets all day long. And we now see what it's doing to social development and emotional development and cognitive development, but now, of course, vision development.
Yeah, it's huge, right? I mean, you see this with I'm sure with a lot of your patients. I'm not sure if you have kids. I have kids, and like I know that with kids, it's hard to get them outside. Mine are relatively young, so I can still force them to not watch television or have screens close to their face for long periods of time yet. But I see this happening, and it's difficult. And of course, there's also seasonal changes too. Like it's winter here in Colorado, so it's not that easy to get outside and get your sunlight. So you can be like me and get one of these, these fancy UV lamps for the house and do that. So that's something that I haven't got my kids in front of yet, but I've at least started doing myself.
How old are your kids?
My oldest is 14 and my youngest is 7. So
nice.
So far, my oldest needs glasses like a little bit sometimes. She doesn't use them very often. We try actually, which is interesting, like as long as she's not getting headaches, I tell her not to wear the glasses, right? Because I don't want her eyes to be like mine and just get so terrible very quickly when she was around her age.
Well, so I've got twins that are 10 and then I have a 7-year-old, and they know we are not a house that supports digital devices.
Yeah.
And I'm also not going to be the parent that's just like saying you can't do this ever, and then that's going to make them want to do it even more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we've got time limits, and as much time as they're on a near tablet, they have to spend at least that much time outdoors. But they also wear what we call digital performance lenses, which are therapeutic glasses, not compensatory. So not glasses like yours that take something far away and make it clear, but glasses that optimize brain function by decreasing the visual stress associated with screens. So a balanced amount of magnification changes how we process information, a really high quality blue light filter. I mean, there's protective ways to make it so screens are less terrible.
Gotcha.
But ultimately, like, especially for your kids, bigger the screen, the farther away, the better, and everything in moderation.
Yeah. So digital performance lenses, I don't know anything about these. So tell me a little bit about this world. I know that you've recently had a podcast with Asprey, Dave, and that's already well released, and I'm sure you've gotten very popular since then. So I'm glad I caught you before you got really, really big out there in the world. But I'm sure this is something you talked about with him. I'd love to. What is a digital performance lens, and how is it something you need to get like tested for and get specific lenses? It sounds like, right?
Well, as long as I'm taking transcriptions forever, we're gonna be buddies because I need you and you need me. Yeah. So digital performance lenses this is kind of crazy. So I've been prescribing these for 15 years.
Okay.
And only when the pandemic hit did these become sexy, because everyone then started, screens were catapulted into life.
Yes.
So it is
I know that I need them. I don't know what they are, but that's why I wanted to know more about them.
Absolutely. So blue light's gotten all the attention.
Of course.
And blue light in general is not bad for us. Blue light is great for us.
Exactly.
It's essential. Yeah. We need it for life.
Yeah.
And for so many aspects of life. But
blue light. I had a funny conversation with a biohacker a couple of weeks ago that he's like new to the biohacking scene, and he was wearing his blue light blockers like daily throughout the day with everything he did inside, and he was so tired. I'm like, dude, take off your fucking blue light glasses.
Yeah. I mean, so I will say there are certain people who are so visually sensitive that any amount of junk or trash light, they literally like go into fight or flight response and
Very true. Yeah.
They're miserable. But it doesn't sound like this is your friend here.
No.
Blue light, the blue light that's artificial, that's blasted with the high contrast, short wavelength on the screen.
Yeah, the stuff
that's what blasts our brain, not in a good way. Digital performance lenses are what allows for functional skills to be at their equilibrium over time. So performance over time. And so it's the right combination of either balanced plus magnification, which almost acts as like a spot for the focusing system if you're lifting weights. It doesn't do the work for you, but it kind of disengages some of that extra visual stress associated.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cool. Like,
or depending on the case.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Like you're doing the bench. You're still lifting the weight, but you're making sure it's not going to fall on you.
Okay. All right.
Interestingly, I've tore my pec many years ago on the bench, and thank God I had spotters, because I wouldn't be here today otherwise.
Yeah, that can be dangerous. I always have a spotter at the gym, ladies and gentlemen, if you're trying to be huge and do lots of bench pressing. I think most of us of about our ages don't do that anymore, but
that's pre-kids, pre-spouses, all of that.
All those things.
But then also with with a different type of profile, it can be a small amount of what's called prism lenses, which prism just artificially repositions where something's located in space.
Okay.
So if somebody has trouble converging their eyes, you can have a little bit of prism that actually moves the world out. So there's, again, less tension on the outside muscle system, the coordination version system. Okay. So really, in a perfect world, these are customized, where we figure out what is the weakest lens possible that gives the most improvement, that's most balance between each eye, but most importantly, that improves performance over time. Mm-hmm. In gathering a ton of data over a dozen years, we found that about 80% of kids do really, really well with this specific prescription that is in between what would be considered kind of the normal prescriptions, but we just make them custom and then you sell them. But then ideally go to a functional eye doctor who knows how to explore this stuff, and they can say what is going to be therapeutic, not compensatory, to make it so there's less
consideration. That's my consideration there as you're talking. And because we were talking earlier about the brain, or the visual system getting lazy, in the sense of if you give it a lot of magnification, or like with me wearing contacts when I was 16, my eyes got very, very bad very quickly because my eyes didn't have to work anymore, right? So it sounds like it's a fine line with being able to create a performance lens and not like a compensatory mechanism.
It totally is. And for an adult, this is going to sound very hyperbolic, but when your eye is not growing anymore as an adult, your prescription shouldn't change every year.
Right.
And if it does, that's a sign of a functional problem. And yet we're just feeding the symptom rather than looking at the root cause.
How old should it be when your eyes like stop changing typically? I mean, on average.
Yeah. Well, so most of the time, the times in life when there's the most drastic change, it's in childhood when we're learning to read.
Okay.
And then when we're reading to learn. It's in adolescence when our body's changing and growing.
Sure.
It's in high school or college when there's a huge increase in near demands. And then it's usually in grad school. So at a absolute latest, it should be when you're done with grad school. But even still, like you mentioned family members who are attorneys. I'm married to an ex-attorney. Attorneys don't go through law school without having some sort of vision problem, just because we're not meant to be reading those textbooks all day long. So it really should be like mid-20s. I don't think there's any eye doctor who would disagree with that.
Okay.
But when myopia progresses, the eyeball actually elongates. And so there is growth that happens sometimes indefinitely until you're tackling that root cause of what's causing the issue. And then you knock that out, and then the need for clarity to increase or to adapt to the lens you're in goes away, or at least lessens
over time. Yeah. Okay. So with these visual performance lenses, typically they do allow in some blue light, or is it like they're completely blue light blocking kinds of things too?
We created these in a way where it's blocking a large percentage of blue light.
Okay.
But it's not blocking the percentage that your friend, the biohacker, has, where there's these dark red glasses, which unless it is dark red, amber, or like a certain wavelength of orange, or even a really dark yellow, those block 100% of blue light.
Sure.
But a clear lens that's really effective can block anywhere from 1 to like 70%.
Okay.
And so it really depends on the spectrum of the blue light. And when you get those glasses off of Amazon that are like $3.99 for blue light glasses, you're typically paying for what you get, but they're blocking a very narrow range that just technically can say, oh yeah, well, 433 nanometers are blocked, so technically it's a blue light, versus, okay, we're going from 400 to 472, let's say. I mean, it just,
right. So it's pretty granular there in the sense of like what exactly in the spectrum of blue light you're actually blocking versus what you're allowing in.
100%.
Yeah.
And blue light is really like 400 to 450 nanometers is considered mostly blue light.
Right.
And kind of our human eye can typically only detect light from like 380 to 700.
Okay.
And so when you think about LED lights, which, you know, are sometimes usually peak around like 435, 440, or when you think about the higher wavelength ones like microwaves and, you know, the lower wavelength ones like gamma ray, it just kind of depends on how we're shifting the processing of that light. And
okay.
You know, there's a lot that can be done, but that's kind of getting into the weeds there.
No, I gotcha. Okay. That's super interesting. Okay. So when it comes to like sticking on this performance side for a little while before we go to the sort of the condition, like if you're somebody that's, you know, if you want to, like what kind of eye exercises or what kind of, like, what would you recommend for somebody that's looking to optimize their eye? Well, I guess before I get here, just one thing on the visual performance lenses. So you can't just go and buy these online. You really do recommend you go and find like a practitioner, like a functional optometrist like you to actually tailor these for you, right? So that's the best option, or
so that would be
other options. Yeah,
that would be best case scenario for sure. In the last year, we've started selling these on myvisionfirst.com, my practice's website.
Okay.
Just to get these accessible and out there. But there's a clear disclaimer on there. Like if you're wearing glasses or contacts for sight, then these are probably not going to work unless it's over your contacts and it's already corrected.
Right.
And so ideally, like you're figuring out what is best for you.
Right.
But for kids, I'm a big believer every kid should be wearing these.
And I mean, while they're on screens, right? Is what
while they're on screens, just on near screens.
Okay. Yeah, I do have my kids on, you know, the blue light blocker, you know, yellow lenses at night at least, and when they're on screens, but I don't have it during the day. But you recommend during the day, even when people are like you and I right now on a computer screen, that they should be wearing something that's blocking some of the more artificial blue light that's more detrimental kind of thing.
And we'll talk after. I'm going to send your kids, have them pick out what they want. We'll send them to you. Yeah. But the plus that's in there, the magnification, is a game changer compared to just the blue light.
So there's magnification too.
The magnification is really what defines and separates digital performance lenses from anything else. They're way more than just blue light glasses.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, cool. So my other question, which I was getting ahead of myself, was we're talking about myopia, talking about you know, creating, what kind of eye exercises do you recommend people that are in their 30s to 40s to prevent them from getting that myopia, you know, come on, like they need to wear readers and things like that. Like what do you typically do in the office for that?
Well, so for myopia progression, there's several treatment modalities out there that nobody knows about that are really effective. One of them is called orthokeratology. They're contact lenses you sleep in at night that change the shape of your cornea. Take them off in the day, you see crystal clear all day long. So it's kind of like a retainer for your eyes instead of for your teeth. In my opinion, that's the number one way to slow down the progression of nearsightedness. In most cases, it stops it. There's also certain contact lenses you can wear during the daytime that are fit differently, something called MySight contacts that have like a bullseye effect where the center of the lens is the clearest. It's a little less clear as we go out because there's magnification. Those are helpful. There's even eye drops you can use that make it so the focusing muscles don't work the same and paralyze them at some level. Those are really more, and those have been around for a while. Those are really to just address the symptom of eyesight. But in terms of what you're asking and the questions there, I think the work to work on the functional systems, that's really where the needle is moved. And so view it as kind of like going to the gym, but for your eyes and really for your brain, where something like vision performance training or vision therapy or vision training, and there's differences with all these, but it's teaching the person how to use their eyes to rewire the software of their brain to change how they're using vision, but to really establish synergy between the different sensory systems and visual skills. So it's teaching the patient what it feels like, what it looks like, the depth that ensues when both eyes are pointing to the same place and the brain's turning on to that information. and then introducing it as there's movement and cognition and balance and vestibular input all engaged. And then we're building the foundational skills where with enough repetition and enough practice, these maladaptations or bad habits that we're treating no longer options because the brain's been rewired. So can give examples of that. We are kind of the leaders in the space on utilizing technology. So we do a lot of augmented reality, eye tracking computers, virtual reality, where, you take an eye tracking computer, for instance, there's asteroids that float around on the screen. And so you're telling a child, I want you to look at the asteroid. And when they look at it, the asteroid doesn't explode. But when they look to the side, the asteroid explodes. But then we can get a sensor saying, here's where you're telling your eyes to look. Here's where you're thinking your eyes are look. You're closing that gap and raising to their awareness how to self-correct. And then all of a sudden, we can explode it. Something like virtual reality. We do customized virtual reality for all of our patients as part of the home program, where they go in and do the games, do the work. Our doctors on the back end adjust the programming each week. We have testing protocols, and then we change the settings based off of the responses, but it allows for better results faster because we're training the brain in a way that we can't access in real life. Or augmented reality, taking an image and manipulating it based off of how you're looking at it.
Yeah, that's so super cool. And I think what you're kind of describing here a little bit is like the difference between sort of more intensive therapy versus more sort of long-term, exercise, going 3 days a week kind of thing. Talk a little bit about the difference there and sort of what, you can go through any lens you'd like, and maybe we can go through something like, if you want, like one of the conditions, like a concussion, for example, or even somebody like that's coming in as from more health optimization and biohacking, that's fine. But there's an intensive period, right? And then there's going to be a maintenance period. Talk a little bit about how you kind of define those. And like you talked about all these cool different types of technologies, and it sounds like asteroids blowing up and virtual reality and augmented stuff. That sounds awesome. So give me a little bit of just more of a framework there of how you do it and how you think about it. Pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Association, a nonprofit organization training practitioners how to optimize health rather than treat disease. For this episode, check out our Metabolomics module. We speak about antioxidants in this conversation. We talk about over-antioxidizing, actually causing oxidative load. If you learn metabolomics, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors, and how to optimize these in your own health and in your patients' and clients' health, it's going to be transformative. Go to homehope.org, check out the Metabolomics module, save 10% on this module by using code podcast10 at checkout. Now back to the show.
Sure. So I would look at this as there's kind of like 3 levels. There's the elite level, which is in-office training with doctors, board certified in this space, who can put all the pieces together. That'd be like going to the gym and working with a trainer and utilizing strength and cardio and flexibility and stamina and all the different systems. That's going to get you in the best results. That's going to get you in the best shape the fastest.
Yeah.
There's the other end of that spectrum. Just home exercises you can do, like body weight stuff, sit-ups, push-ups, and air squats, but for the eyes. We could talk through 1, 2, 5 of these, where certain things that everybody should do every day when you're on the toilet or at a stoplight, or, when you can kind of tie them into routines that you're not going to forget how to do those.
We got to talk about those, because especially when you're on the toilet instead of scrolling on your phone, right? So
100%. Well, let's talk about it now. So
go ahead. Yeah.
Near far focus is a great activity. This is like push-ups for the eyes. So take your hand, cover up one of your eyes.
Okay.
And then with the other eye, you're going to take a pen or pencil, even your finger.
Okay.
Make sure you're using the right finger here, not the wrong one. And then you want to slowly bring it down your midline as close to you as you can until it gets a little blurry. And then stop, hold it, and try and make it clear. And think about how you're stimulating the focusing system. You're looking hard. You're looking right at it. Hold it clear for 5 seconds. And then look out into the distance. Throw your focus across the room. Hold it out there for 5 seconds. Think about how soft you're looking and how you're kind of disengaging that system. Then back at the finger for 5 seconds. Then back at the distance for 5 seconds. So it's kind of a gross constriction, relaxation of the ciliary body or the accommodative system. Same amount of time, right eye as left eye. And you'll notice the more you do this, the closer your finger is going to get. And you'll notice that as you're doing this, maybe with your right eye, your finger's here, and with your left eye, your finger's here. That's literally because you're focusing your eyes to different planes. We couldn't teach a brain to do that if we tried, but that binocular rivalry that manifests when it's too hard to use both eyes together, that's a very common maladaptation that people do that they don't even know they do. So for you not wanting to get reading glasses or get them stronger if you did this near far focus literally every day, it wouldn't be until the 50s until we're at least talk about something like this. That's just one simple thing.
And how long are you doing it for typically, that exercise?
Few hours a day. No, I'm just kidding. You do it like 2 minutes right eye, 2 minutes left eye. Do something like I am very big on let's be practical here and let's not just like say, well, this isn't even attainable. Why would we do this? Near far focus is great. There's eye stretches. There's peripheral pointing. We talk about any of these things.
What's eye stretches?
Eye stretches. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard of palming, which is like you rub your hands together, you put your hands over your eyes, and you're magically supposed to just have all your problems go away. That's from like 100 years ago.
I haven't heard of that one.
A lot of people talk about that. Eye stretches.
So you rub your hands together.
Rub your hands together.
Okay.
Create heat. Put your elbows on the table. You cover. This is not the one I'm saying we should do, by the way.
Okay, sure. Okay.
But you're covering your eyes and you're decreasing the stress from the eyes where many of us hold our stress.
Okay. I mean, I've heard of massaging the eyeballs. Like
that's another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's certain protocols that are literally from 100 some years ago that are like, that's what people do. And it helps some people. Okay. But we've learned a lot more over the years. So something like eye stretches, cover up an eye, look as far up to the ceiling as you can. And don't go too far that you can't hold fixation. So as far as you can where your eyes not dancing around. Okay. Hold it for 5 seconds. As far down to the floor as you can. Hold that for 5 seconds. As far to the left as you can. And then the right. And then the diagonals. Same thing. Right eye is left eye. We are literally stretching the striated muscles, the 6 extraocular muscles around our eyeballs.
Totally stretching them. Totally understand it now. Okay, cool.
And I mean, there's people who say that alone can almost prime them for work. And a lot of the athletes I work with, they have pregame rituals where even without equipment, we're doing eye stretches, near far focus, and different like thumb rotation activities just to kind of get their vision raring to go. Right. And then in the middle of that tier, we have the office-based therapy, we have the home stuff. We have an online vision training program called ScreenFit, which is a more directed home workout program and really effective. It's guided.
Right. It gives you more like feedback, right? In the sense of like, am I doing this right? Or like, or just more, you're having to be something to like force you to do it. Like it's actually something that's going to remind you. Yeah.
It's like doing an app to work out. So there's 30 different lessons. Each lesson's 10 minutes. You do one a day. That could be 6 to 8 weeks or even longer, depending on how much you're doing. Yeah. So there's lots of ways to enter this eye exercise space. But, I think if anyone listening here is thinking like, man, my eyes are tired at the end of the day, or I can't wait to shut down the back-to-back Zooms, or I'm starting to get tech neck where I'm leaning into the screen all day long. I mean,
I see that in kids now too. My goodness, it's crazy. Yeah.
Most common symptom of a focusing stamina or flexibility problem with eye focus in kids is literally pulling the tablets up against your face or leaning in close to books or to the screen. If you think about this focusing system as like an old school camera lens, if it's stuck on manual focus, your body's having to adjust to bring it in. But if you can get autofocus rolling, then you can adjust at any distance and your body doesn't have to change position to find and maintain clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a good question. One question I do want to ask you, this is kind of on the line, is visual ergonomics in general, right? So like, how should people be looking at, I mean, we talked about performance lenses. This sounds like a really good idea. Talked about the blue light piece a little bit, but what do you recommend people, other ergonomic recommendations for vision? I mean, it sounds like changing your focus is a big one, right? So not always looking at the screen, looking at far distances, but anything with like how like the level of the screen or like angles or
I'm glad you're bringing this up. This is simple stuff, low-hanging fruit that everyone should do. So line of sight should be about 15 degrees below eye level. So the top of the computer screen should be about 15 degrees below eye level.
Oh wow! So I should be much higher. Okay. We should be looking down.
I mean, you want the top line of text to be like right where your eyes are on the screen.
Gotcha. Okay.
But the line of sight should be looking down.
Okay, got it.
And you really want to be if you lean all the way back, and you extend your arm all the way out, the tip of your middle finger is kind of the closest you should be to the screen.
Okay. So you don't want to be like all the way in front. You want to be like about the tip of the screen. Okay, good.
About there. And when we're reading, books or print, it's usually closer. So that's something called the Harmon distance. So if you were to go put your fist to your face here, the middle knuckle to your elbow, that's the closest you want to hold a book at.
The middle knuckle to your elbow. Okay. All right.
So the taller you are, the longer that distance is.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. So it's like here. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
So screen should be farther back. And for most people, it's like 16 to 30 inches, depending on comfort level, but that's how far away the screen should be. And then brightness and contrast are really important. So I always say, like, bring them down to 0, both of those, and then slowly increase the percentage until you find that sweet spot of comfort.
Okay. Gotcha. So as little contrast or as little brightness as you can tolerate, kind of thing.
And then the blue light, I think computer use in the evening can really throw off circadian rhythm. So love that your kids are in yellow glasses there.
Yes, they're yellow.
Apple products have the night shift mode. But I mean, ideally, it's like when the sun goes down, we should have these screens gone. And realistically, that doesn't happen. So then getting a higher quality blue light filter, I usually recommend the biohacking ones, the red, orange, or yellow ones for like evening time.
Right. And
then the non-colored ones during the daytime, if you care how you look, especially with calls and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. So I use the yellow lenses. I mean, I've heard a little bit, maybe you know a little bit more about this than I do, is that there's been a lot of emphasis, obviously, on blue light at night causing, sleep disturbances and obviously visual disturbances over time as well. Yeah. But I've also heard that like the major issue is not as much only as the blue light, but also the actual brightness itself of the light. Is that true as far as you know?
It is, but I would say I'm of course very biased because I'm looking at this from the lens of the eyes.
Sure.
But we have these specialized cells in our retina, in the back of our eyes, whose sole responsibility is to signal the sleep-wake cycle to release melatonin.
Sure.
And if these photoreceptors are overstimulated constantly all day long, then that can suppress the secretion of melatonin. And we know when that happens, that can throw off metabolic function. There's even links for, sleep disturbances causing terrible medical problems like cancers and things like that. So, I think that the key here is we don't want these photoreceptors always activated, because then they just don't know how to not be on. And then we get into this negative feedback loop there.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I'm with you. I just think that what I was a little bit concerned about, like when there's lots of people, a lot of influencers and others that are not medical, as you know, on the social media channels and talking about wearing blue light glasses. Yeah. And then I have a friend of mine that doesn't take them off for days and then gets really tired and has other issues. Right. And so I just think that I was reading about the brightness factor being a big part of it too. So the lux aspect of it.
And brightness, is very much linked to autonomic function.
Okay.
And I think that's where this should probably go to, in that,
Makes
when
sense.
when we're under stress from a visual standpoint, our pupils widen and we get this tunnel vision effect, but that's allowing more light in. And many of us are under stress from our environment all day, every day, which means more light is coming in. So more brightness is blasting your eyes and brain. And then all of a sudden you're not able to self-regulate and self-monitor so many just systemic systems like you could before.
That's it. Totally makes sense to me now. Okay.
And what's interesting is when we're on a screen, our pupils are supposed to constrict because they're looking close and the accommodative system, the focusing muscles are locked in, and light is blasting. So that's protective. And yet if you're blocking that light with sunglasses or really strong blue light glasses, your brain doesn't know how to control that aperture smoothly, efficiently. And then you get into this fight or flight response that there's not really an end in sight with if you're not changing how you're operating.
That's the best way I've heard it described. So thank you, because now it's the brightness that it's an autonomic signal for your sympathetic nervous system to be active. And that's also going to obviously screw up your evening in lots of ways because of those hormones and suppressing melatonin and all that. So thank you for actually putting that together for me, because that makes a lot of sense.
Awesome.
I wanted to talk a little bit about concussion, if we can, because I do a lot of work, as you know, and you and I spoke about this, I think, on our first call before our podcast today, about how I work with concussion a lot. Tell me about, and you said like almost everybody that comes in with a concussion has a visual disturbance of some sort, right?
Yeah.
How do you work these patients up, and like, what is your kind of pathway? What's your framework for them? Because I'm personally interested in how, the things that I do can insert in themselves, or vice versa, how I can send more people to you as a result of the work that you're doing. Yeah.
I mean, so when you've seen one concussion patient, you've seen one concussion patient. Everybody's different, and every profile is different.
I love
but
that. Yeah.
I will say vision dysfunction is present in every single head injury. It's just a matter of at what level. I'm a big believer that while symptoms of concussion may improve, the vision problems do not. We just learned how to bypass or
compensate.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
okay.
The sensory overload in crowded environments like the mall or grocery store, the dizziness or nausea with reading or on screens, the visual vestibular disconnect where we get motion sick when we're not in motion or we can't regulate those systems. I mean, these are all our dominant sensory system of vision not guiding and leading like it's intended to, and not being able to create order from some of the disorder that's in the world. Mm-hmm. And again, I know I'm biased, but every single concussion patient I see complains of screen engagement. And it goes back to regulating the light sensitivity and the brightness, the very intricate eye movements that are required that are very different on a screen compared to reading a printed page.
Yeah.
On screens, there's more of them and they're more sporadic. There's a lot more to process and take in. And the brain's ability to process information shifts with a head injury.
Right.
And that whole, tunnel vision effect that occurs because we're under autonomic dysfunction, that is something that vision can pull you out of that, and you can establish cohesion with those systems. But, there's probably three main profiles for the practitioners listening that emerge from a head injury. So one of them is a convergence insufficiency, which is really common. Right. And that's literally the inability to converge the eyes to a single point. But again, has nothing to do with eye muscle strength or length. It has to do with coordination and a spatial mismatch at near. Mm-hmm. So that's really common. Very often also there's a lead of accommodation with exoposture or with a convergence insufficiency. So what that means is looking at a piece of paper, looking up close and over focusing and under converging our eyes.
Okay.
We couldn't teach the brain to do that if we tried. It's not how those systems are wired, but that is a way so that you don't have to use both systems in synergy. And so we learn how to adapt that way. And then the visual vestibular disconnect that emerges where, and that's, especially with head injury, I'm sure you see this all the time. Like most structural standard medical doctors, like their tests don't show anything because they're not looking at brain activity and functional MRIs. They're saying, oh yeah, there's no blood pooling and I don't see anything wrong. So this must be in your head.
What would they do anyway? Like at this point, the concussion clinics are a waste of time for most of these patients, as you know. Yeah. So, so continue. But so in the sense that there's these three different types of sort of visual disturbances
profiles.
We see. Profiles. Do you, thankfully this advice is less common now, but what about the advice of staying in a dark room, off screens, don't move for days after a concussion? That's got to be terrible for your eyes, right? In this case.
So it's either that or it's you got your bell rung, you're fine, get back into life. And neither is right. So we know we have to slowly increase the level of demand.
Right.
But also, if you're doing the work as you're slowly increasing the level of demand, you're titrating to get back to the visual stress and visual demands of life that you were under previously.
Right.
And I see way too many people who are like, I went back to work, things were getting better. Then all of a sudden, like, the rug got pulled out from underneath me and I just had to disengage for several days and now I'm a mess. And, it's typically when the symptoms have emerged, that's when it's almost too late, when you've asked your body and your visual system to do things that it wasn't prepared for. Mm-hmm. So I always say, like, slowly increase the amount of screen time, take a ton of breaks, slowly increase the amount of sequential processing, slowly increase the cognitive load that you're putting on yourself. And then if you feel like you're doing well, then add a little more the next day.
Right. And you're giving different exercises depending on these three different types of presentations typically, or is it pretty much the same for each of the three?
Oh, no, all different. So our model is really holistic in that we're working on all the different visual systems simultaneously. And so we're doing binocular work. We're doing monocular work. We're doing monocular work in a binocular field. We're doing visual processing work. We're doing ocular motor and tracking work. And it's almost like a cross-training approach to reboot the visual brain. But we're also relying on supplements to help improve brain function. And lifestyle modifications and nutrition is a huge piece. I mean, you see this, right? Like
Of course. Yeah.
gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol, processed crap, that's what triggers many of these symptoms and increases, sensitivity.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up. That's where I wanted to go with this a little bit, because I know that, as you mentioned, you're a holistic practitioner. How do you approach the nutritional aspects? Are you doing testing at your office? Are you kind of doing more empirical? Like, we know that these things are bad, and we know that, for example, going more fat-based and ketogenic is good for the brain on these circumstances? Or how do you typically approach it?
I've evolved a lot because a couple years ago, I tried to do it all, and we would do testing and have all these supplements, and I've now worked so closely with so many functional medicine docs and integrative docs and people who are and functional neurologists and normal doctors that, I think for most people, it's holding their hand with health coaching. So we have health coaches in our practice.
Got it.
But it's really like talking through what they're doing, and then not just limiting what they're putting into their body, but taking the right type of kind of intuitive approaches where we're healing internally, but then relying on food as just instructions for our body to function. So if somebody's like, tell me exactly what to do to just like flip everything upside down, I'll say, limit sugar, limit gluten and dairy, and a ketogenic diet is absolutely the best one for optimizing brain function, intermittent fast, so that you can get autophagy to be tapped into and get the recycling truck to clean up everything. Yeah. But then supplements. I mean, we've got a brain boosting supplements that are much better than others in terms of providing the brain high doses of what it needs to heal.
What are some of the top supplements that you use in your patients specifically for eye issues? And just as a quick aside, I had a friend of mine who did a 5-day fast. He was about 65 years old at the time. And he's like, Scott, after 5 days, floaters gone. It's like impressive, right? So you can see these kinds of things with changing it.
And floaters are like the biggest pain point for, I would say I get at least 5 comments on social media every day about floaters. And
I've got them.
They're so annoying. All eye doctors say there's nothing that can be done. There are laser procedures where they can blast the floaters, but often instead of one massive one, you've got.
Is it like being in a video game where you got to find them and like blast them like you run? It's like they're always moving, man.
It's the video game, but you don't want game over because.
No, exactly. I don't want game over for my eyes.
No chance. So you know what has helped me tremendously with my floater? I started with C60, which is an antioxidant. Yep. But then I have started taking glutarol.
Glutarol. I don't know.
Glutarol, absolute game changer. Dr. Nayam Patel, and it's through Aura Wellness, but it's glutathione in a transdermal spray.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And his research is unbelievable in terms of.
This has helped your floaters.
My floaters are gone.
Interesting. When I turned 44, I have a new one that looks like a bird, I look this way and it feels like.
Did you name it? You got to give it a name.
I should name it. I haven't.
So start taking glutarol. At a minimum, your detox pathways will be stronger.
Sure. I'm pretty well optimized on those with the stuff that I do, but I mean, so we can go back to the supplements. You can include things like, anything good for floaters. Otherwise, please.
Yes. So high level antioxidants for floaters, that can be helpful. But supplements,
like which ones for antioxidants, like specifically, does it?
I mean, I think I look at C60 and glutarol as just like I'm taking antioxidants on steroids. Okay. But I would imagine there's a lot more that you take more, it's only gonna be a better chance it gets better.
Sure. My consideration with this is that if you take too many antioxidants, in some cases, you can actually have the opposite effect where in some antioxidants, if you take too much of them, like vitamin E, for example, CoQ10, these can become oxidative if you take too many. And this is what I do testing with and everything. But that's kind of an aside, but just as the reason why I ask you for like the types of antioxidants,
I'm not the one to speak on the types other than I've seen and heard of all that you're sharing. And I know, you gotta, even though there's supplements, you got to be careful with as well, even though there's not always recommendations. Yeah.
Well, so what are your top 5 or so that you typically would use for your patients, specifically for eye related issues? Yeah.
So other than methylene blue, obviously,
nice.
Which I'd love to hear from your perspective how that can really benefit head injuries. But number one, omegas, fish oil. I mean, I think getting a high quality, high dose of omegas. I usually do
omega-3 specifically, omega-3. Nine.
I think one that's broad and kind of encompasses a lot. We use a company called Degeneration, which is pretty good, but really high quality that can provide your brain high doses of what your brain is made of.
Sure.
Right. And so I do a loading dose for 2 weeks and then a little bit less after, but it's hard to take too many omegas.
Are you one of these like 20 gram people of omegas? Or are you kind of more like the loading of like 4 to 8 grams of?
Yeah,
I know it obviously
40.
Okay, all right.
I'm not the 20. I have a neurologist friend who recommends 9 twice a day for 2 weeks.
Yeah. There's going down. Yeah, Michael Lewis. He actually lives around you. You know, Michael.
Yeah.
So he's the one that does like 20 grams of fish oil or something crazy like that. So,
and he's When Brains Collide is his book, right?
That's his book.
Yeah. He's studied omegas more than anybody, I would think.
Yeah.
Great guy. So
omegas are big. Okay.
Omegas are big. Glutarol has now become really big. So I always recommend the glutathione, but specifically glutarol now.
Okay.
I think CoQ10, ashwagandha, turmeric, curcumin, magnesium L-threonate. And it's so funny. We see so many people from Hopkins or one of the big hospitals that are like, oh yeah, my doctor told me to take magnesium. I don't know if it's doing much. And then you ask and you see like they're taking citrate and they're on the toilet all day.
Magnesium oxide or something. Yeah.
Correct.
No.
It's like,
threonate is the best
barrier
one.
matters.
Yeah.
I think threonate's
that's the best one for the eyes overall that you find? Or?
I think so because it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
Sure.
And so truthfully, anything that's good for the brain is going to be good for the eyes.
Makes sense. So that's I think that's the kicker right here is like anything that's optimizing your brain health is also going to optimize your eye health, right? I like that. Yeah.
And even with omegas and our tear film, I mean, the average person blinks 15 times a minute. And when you go to screens, it goes down to 3 times a minute.
Really?
Which means your own tears are not covering the front surface as much. You're not cleaning off the debris from the windshield. Your brain then sends a signal to release more tears, yet the tears are coming out more of the watery layer rather than the mucin oily layer.
Interesting. Okay.
So your own tears evaporate faster.
And I live in Colorado, so it's even worse. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, so anyone with dry eye or dry symptoms or irritation on their eyes, 2 weeks of omega-3 at a higher dose than they're taking, and it's going to at least be better.
I love that. Okay, so you talked a little bit about methylene blue, so we can chat a little bit about that. Have you had... Your clinical experience is still in the early stages, right? You've tried this on yourself, I think, only at this point.
I've been trying only on myself, but I'm pretty much out of what I ordered. So I'm now ready to speak on my experience to my patients, but would love the expert here. I would love you to share as much as you're willing to share about why we should all be taking this.
Sure. I mean, I guess maybe my first question would be like what your experience has been, and then maybe I can kind of color the mechanisms briefly on that.
So, I mean, I think in terms of alertness and decreased brain fog and just energy, it's been fantastic. I've heard, and I've been so excited to ask you this. I've heard from a couple high-profile people on social media that the only reason to put methylene blue in your mouth and in your gums is from a marketing standpoint. If you just swallow it, it has the same effect. I can't imagine that's true, but I'm curious.
Well, the best way? The answer is yes and no, in the sense that methylene blue is 100% bioavailable, just about, which is kind of a crazy thing. So most supplements that we take, about 10, 20% bioavailability is very, very common, which means that most of it gets degraded before it even gets into your system. That's because of your stomach, your small intestine, your liver kind of breaking things down, detoxifying, inactivating. But methylene blue is interesting because it doesn't have that, actually. It actually gets more activated in the liver sometimes overall, but at least it stays as active. It can change its conformation a little bit. But in essence, it's 100% bioavailable, whether you dissolve it in the mouth or if you swallow it in your stomach and do it that way. Now, the major difference though, Bryce, is that it's going to work faster in the mouth. And so people that have more cognitive issues, and this has been across the board really, is that if they dissolve it in the mouth, they will feel better faster. And that is usually a better reinforcement of what they're feeling, which is, oh, wow, I do feel better. Wow, that blue stuff is really making me feel better. So my cognition's better, my memory's better, my focus is better. I don't feel stimulated. If you take pure methylene blue, you don't really feel stimulated. You just feel like you're more elevated overall, the kind of the way you described it. So, but I also say that you can swallow it on an empty stomach with with the transcriptions product, and then eat about 15 to 20 minutes later, and that will give you a relatively similar effect than putting in the mouth. But if you truly have cognitive issues, then I do recommend at least trying it in the mouth and seeing if that has a significant effect on top of what you would have if you did it in swallowed and had that effect. It's going to be the same amount of methylene blue is going to get in, but it's going to get in faster. So your peak is going to be a little bit faster if you dissolve it in the mouth. So, but yes, you will have a blue mouth. Yes, it does make for nice marketing on social media. And that's really how we grew the company initially, with the visual aspects of this, but knowing that there was a therapeutic benefit. But specifically in the eye, I mean, the eye, as far as muscles go, there are no muscles that work more during the day than the eyes, right?
Correct. And fastest reflex in the body is the blink reflex.
Yeah.
And highest percentage of mitochondria in the body is in the eyes. So, I mean,
is that right?
Yeah.
Is it the highest in the eyes?
I mean, that's what I've read.
I mean, I've read that it's in the ovaries and testicles and like sperm and eggs.
Oh, that sounds
But I need to look this up because because it would make sense to me, like at least from a musculoskeletal tissue, it makes 100% sense that the eyes have the most mitochondria per cell. We talk about,
they're the most metabolically active tissues in the eyes because our so many of our photoreceptors are active when we're not even awake and when our eyes are closed.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'll have to look that up, but that's, I mean, certainly it's a really interesting one. But anyway, so where does methylene blue work is in the mitochondria, which is what's powering obviously your eyes and everything else. But if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're going to see this primarily in the places that have the most mitochondria per cell that are required to make the most amount of energy. So your ovaries, testicles, heart, liver, musculoskeletal tissue, and your eyes. And so what methylene blue can compensate for is any mitochondrial dysfunction that you have. And also for the performance aspect of things, it can allow you to use those muscles for longer or that tissue for longer without fatiguing it, because it can act just like oxygen. And as a result of that, allow you to make energy for longer as a result. So increasing, like if you're an athlete, like it's called your aerobic capacity, your ability to do work longer without having to stop.
Mm-hmm. And with the troche, the 4-piece, do you recommend starting with 1/4 of it for patients or?
Well, yeah, it depends. I mean, usually if we have the Just Blue, which is the lower strength, and we have a Tro Plus Blue, which is the higher strength. So it depends on people's sensitivity, but usually somewhere starting it at like 8 to 12.5 milligrams is usually okay for most people. If they're super sensitive, then starting off at 4 milligrams, like 1/4 of the Just Blue overall. But anyway, that's more on the transcription side. I'm really excited for to have you integrate it within your practice more, because I really do think, along with some of the other supplements that you're taking or you're having your patients take, along with obviously the dietary changes that you mentioned, I think it's going to be a nice add-on in addition to everything else.
Absolutely. And what I haven't shared with anybody yet, so we have this week-long intensive program where people come in and it's 12 hours of work and it's a heavy lift, but it's crazy amounts of results, equivalent of like 3 to 4 months if you're local in a week. But we're adding a really intense supplement stack to basically optimize the time you have here so you can get more out of it. And methylene blue is going to be in there. And so
that's awesome.
that
you should have them come on, and just as a thought, you can actually have them started before they get to where you are. So you pre-treat people before they get to the vision therapy. That might be another way, but we can talk about that offline. But some additional things. I've been working with a number of different clinics that we're talking about these pre-treatment for mitochondrial optimization. Amazing. But anyway, Bryce, back to you, because this is about your podcast. So I wanted to do one more. I have one more question for you. Well, I want to ask you 2 more questions, actually, because there's one thing that I want to ask before we get to the end, which is on macular degeneration. Yes. I heard you talk about this as something very specific related to nutrition, and describe to me and to the clinical people and others that are listening, what is macular degeneration for you as far as how you understand it?
I don't mean to sound insensitive, but I look at it as like type 3 diabetes.
Okay.
And it is from oxidative stress and damage to our macula, to the inner tissue of our eye that allows us to see. Macula is the 20/20 zone. The fovea is the center of the macula that allows us that pinpoint of light to be as clear and sharp as possible. And as we age, that really shouldn't be damaged. But very often macular degeneration comes as we age because of lifestyle and UV damage and all the stuff that many of which is under our control.
Right.
So
Okay.
the different types of macular degeneration, there's wet and there's dry. Wet is when there's new blood vessel growth. Dry is when there's not. But the macula, I mean, that's the area we should be taking the best care of, because you have damage there, you lose central vision.
Yeah.
And you lose central vision and literally everything is compromised. So
is this like more for like a nutritional perspective then? Like really got to optimize that? Or do you have ways like visually to help people while they're, doing some of the dietary and nutritional changes to optimize as well?
Well, so I think definitely sugar and processed food and carbohydrate. I mean, that damages that area directly. We see a lot of people who come in already with macular degeneration. We put them on a crazy strict nutrition and supplement protocol, but then we're doing visual performance training, vision therapy to access periphery and to be more periphery engaged, so that they can still read, even though the sweet spot of the eye is not making the eye movements. We're taking in more with our periphery. And most people don't realize this, but reading is more of a peripheral task than a central task, because you have to be able to localize where the next word is to make the right sized eye movement, so you're not overshooting or undershooting, and actually discriminating to decode. You're not looking at each letter, you're looking at the orientation of letters. And from that visual memory we spoke about initially, going into our memory bank of, okay, I remember these similar letters in this sequence is this word. And only then, if the sentence doesn't make sense, do you go backwards and realize, oh, I decoded that wrong.
Got it.
And so you can read with macular degeneration. You can often drive and function in life, but it requires heightened peripheral awareness. And we have two different processing systems. We have our central focal visual processing and our peripheral ambient visual processing. In a normal healthy brain, we're using these simultaneously, so we can know what's in front of us, around us simultaneously. But so often when there's systemic inflammation that creates oxidative stress in the eyes, that is where that free radical damage accumulates, and where the mitochondria stop functioning the way they're supposed to. And that's where, nutrients are needed to slow it down, heal it. Some cases there's reversal, but it's much harder.
Usually it's a slow down regression and trying to compensate for the peripheral vision, which is really interesting. I like that. Cool. All right. So last question for you. I ask everybody this at the end of the podcast. You can talk about it in any context. So the name of the podcast is Smarter, Not Harder. And so we ask all of our guests, what are 3 ways that we all can live smarter, not harder, Bryce, from your perspective? And this could be from a vision therapy perspective, personal perspective, whatever you like. Just 3 ways that, easy tips for people to do things smarter, not harder. But I think there's a lot of them that you've already mentioned in this podcast. So,
all right. So if I only get 3, I only get 3. I would say, number 1, do not jump into the deep end with over-the-counter readers the first chance that you can get. And an equivalent of that is like, if your knee starts to hurt, you don't all of a sudden just jump into a wheelchair, right? That is the wheelchair.
Okay, got it.
And so even just fighting that and pushing it off and actually working these systems and straining a little is going to mean you're going to be better for longer. Okay, so that's number 1.
I like that.
Number 2, I would say everybody should seek out 20 happy, not just 20/20. And so when you're with your eye doctor and they're telling you need new glasses, or they're telling you this has changed, or whatever it is, be a partner with the doctor. And if we're making a change, there better be an improvement in performance. And ideally, like I've said probably twice already on this, the ideal prescription is the weakest lens possible, if any. That's the most balance between each eye, that gives the most improvement to improve performance.
Got it. Makes sense.
And then third one, I would say, I'm between 2, and I don't want to make it all about glasses, but I think I'm going to make it all about glasses.
That's okay. It's okay.
Don't settle for glasses that don't seem right. When you get a new prescription, or you go to the eye doctor and you put them on and they're like, oh, it's a little off. I'm like, oh no, don't worry. Get used to it. It's fine. Just keep wearing it. Yes, we will get used to it, but that's not a good thing. So if it doesn't seem right, it's not right. And that's where you need to be putting your vision first and looking at vision as kind of the main reason for any type of symptom, whether it's headaches or eye strain or difficulty focusing or motion sensitivity or anything. Vision's a big piece of the puzzle. So let's look into our vision first before we're going down the rabbit holes of other areas.
I love it. I think that I'm going to add number 4 is toilet training, which is like when you're on the toilet doing the
Yes.
vision exercise instead of being on your phone. Maybe that's just what I'm going to do. I mean, and
Scott, I'm going to call this toilet training now because of you. You get credit for that. Thank you.
It's okay. TM license. I don't just, no, you do what you want with it. It's fine. No, Bryce, this has been great. So I really appreciate your time, your expertise. This is like, it's been enlightening for me in many ways.
Amazing.
Where can people find out more about you, what you do, all your online courses, your practice? Give it to me. Give it to everybody here with what you got.
I appreciate that. So myvisionfirst.com is the name of my practice. I've got 2 offices, one in Bethesda, one in Annapolis, both in Maryland, right outside DC. And that's now kind of the hub that hosts everything. So you can find ScreenFit on there, which is also just at screenfit.com. And then we're on all the social platforms, but Instagram is the one that we're growing on the fastest. And that's just Dr. Bryce Appelbaum, Dr. Bryce Appelbaum. So my ancestors, my ancestors wanted to give me a hard time and not spell it like the word apple.
Well, they weren't really going for that at the time, So my name used to be long and Jewish at some point too, much longer, I think.
But mine's still long and Jewish. I need to do what you did.
That's okay. It's okay. It makes you, especially with the spelling that you have. It's good. I like it.
Well, thank you.
Well, Bryce, thanks so much. I really look forward to having more conversations about, obviously collaborating more with products and services and everything else. But I wish you a most fantastic rest of your day, man.
So appreciate it, man. And thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Smarter No Harder podcast, where we give you 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. This was a fantastic podcast to record and to release with Dr. Bryce Appelbaum. I learned so much about vision therapy, about neuro-optometry, about diet, nutrition, supplementation related to neuro-optometry, and so much more. Even things for my kids, even some new glasses, some performance glasses for me too. Very excited about all this. So if you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode. Share with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and we'll see you the next time. Take care.